Hello guys, my name is Diego Pacheco and this will be a slide cast. Today we're going to be talking about management, about culture, about feedback, about like some non-obvious things and some challenging ideas about the status quo and some common and traditional practices, right? So hopefully this will be fun and entertaining. So let's get started with the slide cast. So the title is Management Doing the Non-Obvious Thing. So without further ado, let's drive right into it. Okay. So let's start here. So basically, there is this sort of herd thinking where we kind of follow the flow, and sometimes this is called like the common sense. It can be traced back all the way down to Newton. Because Newton, used to have these ideas that it could explain everything with a simple theory. I personally, in my life, met so many managers that always believe that, if something is not simple, that's something wrong. Leonardo da Vinci often said that simplicity is the, final sophistication, and that's interesting because actually there is a duality there. At some time, yes, we want to build solutions that are simple as possible. We don't want to overcomplicate anything. But at the same time, we actually cannot fix a hard problem with a simple solution, right? And that's the beauty of the thing is the complexity, right? You cannot fix a complex problem with a simple best practice, right? And in the market we see stuff like, oh, if I stuck post-its on the wall, I'm doing agile, or if I have Jira, I'm doing agile, or if I have like a daily meetings, I'm doing agile, right? But often people are not evolving the practices, they're not changing, they're not looking for different things, and things are kind of static. And it's hard to be static when the system that we live is dynamic, right? Like right now, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so everything is changing all the time. Governance come and go, people come and go, right? So the system is complex and dynamic, and we still operate with same process. Looking for simple and naive solutions, right? And that doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. It might work on the past, but now it doesn't work, all right? And that's where we're going to start challenging the status quo and some of the things. So I think the heart of everything is discipline, and people don't think they understand what discipline is. Here, for me, that's the best definition I saw for discipline. I use this in my trainings like more than 10 years. But like discipline, this was found in a wrestling room. Sports are all awesome. In a high school in St. Paris, Ohio, and basically says that discipline is doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it. And I would add more definition on top of that. I think this definition is great, but I think it's also doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it, in the way that you don't want to do it, with the people that you don't want to do it, and also doing that for a long time, right? Not as I do it for 3 weeks or for a month and then I stop it, right? So discipline is hard, but it's the key of everything, right? So if we think about it, there are planes taking off and landing all the time, and most of 999% of the time they are successful, right? And there's lots of discipline to do that, right? And the core of everything, we don't have discipline. Teams don't have discipline. We often start something and we stop. We have this Newtonian thinking where we need to do something simple for a short period of the time. And there's several answers for that, right? Either lack of maturity, or because we are in the middle of a pandemic and everything is harder, or poor management. It's a complex thing. It's not as something black and white. Oh, I just fired that person and then everything is fixed, right? So but the heart of everything is discipline. That's why digital transformations fail. That's why we have issues doing basic agile practices. That's why technical debt emerge. And that's not like the single thing. There's more effects to it, but I would say that's the heart of the thing. So with that, we need to understand that actually what we need is more like a leadership than management, right? Because management traditionally is pretty much like a micromanagement, time management, clocking things, right? Like if you think about the auto industry, right? Like we used to have like a manager with a clock timing how long it takes things to be done, right? And that's a very local thinking, and that's also the root of the problem, right? Having local thinking. I'm gonna talk more about complexity and global thinking later on, right? But management traditionally, it's just being management resources and time. It's not something effective at all, right? And leadership, pretty much, is a funny word that people say all the time, but they really don't know what it means. But really, it is about trust. It's about building relationships. It's about driving things. It's about pitching ideas. It's about convincing people. It's about having a vision and driving that vision to a direction. It's really like making stuff happen, right? And that's not orders, that's not time control, right? I love this definition that trust is the glue of life, and that's like the heart of relationships, right? And leadership is all about that, and that's much bigger and more important than management. So for management, what happens is like people always want to have simple, and that's one hard lesson, right? We need to take, since this is a non-obvious slidecast. We need forget about simple. We need to give up on simple, right? There is this framework from 2002, almost 20 years old, right? The Kinevin, that says that there is natures of systems. Some systems are simple, some systems are chaotic, some systems are complicated, and other systems are complex. Often distributed systems running on the cloud or organizations, they are complex systems. So you cannot have best practices. You cannot have, okay, so if the problem is this, the solution is that, right? It's not linear. It's not Newtonian thinking. So basically, we need to forget about that. We need to give it up, right? And stop trying to find root causes and have this simple thinking, because that doesn't work, right? It can sometimes work locally, but on the long run, looking the big picture on the actually, complex thinking, big picture is also a problem, right? But on the whole, right? Like on the whole system, that can actually make it worse, right? So we need to have a different way to deal with things, and we need to stop this pursuit for simple, right? Simple is a problem, right? And that's also a duality, like I said. Like if we're talking about design, we want to have a simple design, but there's a lot of people and teams and different stakeholders and different needs and different software, different governance, different countries, and things are complex, right? We live and we deal with complex systems, right? So accepting that the chaos is there, that the complexity is there, is the first step to overcome some of these myths or misunderstandings, right, or bad things that we deal with it. So in relation to that, so maybe now with this example, it will be easier for you to understand. So there's this book that I finished recently called Upstream. It's a great discovery book. It's a great book about management as well. And also could tell that it's a great book about system thinking and complexity, right? Because complexity is everything nowadays. And this book, the guy is a shrink. I love his books, by the way. He talks about the tunneling effect, right? That nowadays everybody wants to be a top performer. Everybody wants to perform. Everybody wants to succeed. It's quite addictive because if you perform well, you get a raise. It's really heroic. You really feel great if you, with scarcity of resources and people and money and time and complexity, and if you deliver things under the budget, under the time, that's really feels great, right? Feels like a hero. And if you can do that, that's kind of addictive, right? So you can keep doing, keep going. And then you might think, okay, Diego, but what's wrong with that, right? That's also called focus, all right? And focus is a good thing, yeah, for sure. But focus is also a double-edged sword, right? There is actually another side of the coin that focus can blind you, right? And that's the tunneling effect, all right? It's a shrink concept where you are kind of in a tunnel and then you just go forward. You don't see the whole system, all right? And that kind of put you in a gaming situation, right? Like, for instance, on the book, they talk about a podcast, which is a pretty good podcast. I listened to this podcast as well from Gimlet called Reply All, where they talk about a case in corruption in New York Police Department, where the chief of police was classifying things differently, and then nobody complained, and with that he was getting a raise, and then he moved up to the ladder, and then the next guy do the same, and the next guy do the same, and so on and so on. Then at some point, like the whole chief of police needs to start doing the same, and at some point that propagates that the mayor also needs to hide stuff, because otherwise real estate prices would go down, right? And then what happens is like that silly thing, the small thing, right? Like the butterfly effect in a local part of the system, propagates over time and creates like a systemic cancer, right? Where it's like the crime is ruling everything, right? And then it's really hard to deal with it, right? So, that's an important thing, right? We often think about things in isolation. We think we are not connected, but we are. Look, COVID and what's happening right now, right? That's the ultimate truth, right? The whole world is so much connected, and not only COVID, right? If we look to other things from the past, like economical crisis, right? Look what happens on 2009, right? We are all connected, and we need to stop this Newtonian thinking that, if we do things here in one country or one city or in one company is all isolated, it will not affect the whole, and we will, right? And so we need to stop this tunneling effect and have more complex and system thinking, right? And start to rethink things, rethink budget, rethink teams, rethink solutions, right? And because, again, just because you are delivering on time, that could be a trap, right? You actually could be making worse on a long term. It's like sometimes I feel it's like the climate change thing, right? It's like in Brazil we say like the frog boiling on the water, right? If you put the frog directly on the water, he will jump in right away, right? Because he can see the consequence. And that's an example of a system thinking, a simple thinking, right? A simple system, a simple way of thinking. But if you think about that you put a second pen inside of that, then the frog will not feel the burning yet, but then once he realizes, it will be too late, or he's gonna be dead. I know it's a sad story, but we say that a lot in Brazil, right? And that's like the thing with climate change, right? When we realize it might be too late, right? And that's the tunneling effect, right? I see this so much everywhere in all companies, right? Kind of just looking forward and keep doing whatever they're doing because they were successful in the past. They were top of the market, top notch, leaders and blah blah blah. But then, one day it's too late, right? And that's why you need to be careful with top performance and goals and focus, because these things, just because you are doing, it doesn't mean that's right, or, success can be a bitch. So that's the tunneling effect. That's something really important to know and watch for it, right? And that's why we need to reflect and challenge things, even when we are doing good and doing right, or if we feel we're doing right. But that doesn't happen, right? That doesn't happen at all. And the reason why it doesn't happen is because of ego, right? And ego is the enemy, and that's the name of a great book, by the way, right? So basically, ego, it's unhealthy and make us believe in our own importance, right? It makes us like kind of not right scale things, and then we got like the wrong measure of stuff, and that's what blind us. And also that combined with the tunneling effect, it's really a time bomb, right? And I see this a lot on the market, where like we have a leader with ego, and then you have the tunneling effect together, and two things together are really, really hard. So basically, ego distorts the reality around us. Ego is kind of the enemy of a building, maintaining and recovering, and even doing innovation, right? There's no way you're gonna be doing innovation with ego. So we basically need to remove ego to widen our perspective, and have a sort of a clear head. Imagine like not having ego is like sobriety. When you don't have ego, you are sane and sober, and when you have the ego, you are not sane, you're not sober, right? So some cool examples like Kirk Hammett, which was a very successful and great guitar player, right? He was in Exodus, a great band, and then when he moved to Metallica, that was on the 80s. He went to do guitar lessons with Satriani, and Joe Satriani, one of the greatest guitar players. And I think he was studying from Satriani for 2 years or something. But even so, right, the guy was in a very successful band, joined an even bigger band, and still had this student mindset, and was still learning, right, and get better. And that only happens, right, when you have this anti-ego mindset, right? The other example is the former fighter Ken Shamrock, right? You might remember him from some old UFCs, right? And he had this training philosophy of plus minus equals, right? Like he always said that you want to train with another fighter that's better than you. You want to train with people that are worse than you, and people that are in the same level, right? So that's also interesting to balance perspective. So long story short, the solution to suppress, to channel ego, right, is pretty much humility. Humility, right? That's the cure. But that's hard, right? That's really hard. But the known, the traditional things, often it doesn't tackle that, right? It doesn't challenge that. And often, we have stuff like a hippo, highest paid person opinion, and the decisions go there. So, and I like, Netflix culture, because Netflix says that they don't want you to please your boss. And I think that's a great way to deal with ego, and make sure we're not tunneling, and, we are not trying to do simple things just to gain. It's very easy to set up a goal and a date in a Gantt chart and deliver that and say, yes, that's success, right? That's just making up things. Oh, I'm gonna write that I'm gonna spend a day here, I spend a day there, and then I'm done, right? Win. It doesn't work like that. So, talking about people and organization, basically one other problem we have with the traditional management, it is that, sometimes we require people to talk to each other, right? We make this huge broadcast where everybody talks to everybody, like a insane Twitter feed, right? And that's also a recipe for a mess. And then that's where this other book called Team Topology chimes, where he says that, well, your org chart is your problem with innovation, all right? You cannot innovate because your org chart. And that's an interesting idea, and I think ultimately it's true, because when we look and we think about innovation, right, there's basically two kinds of innovation, right? We have like the startup innovation, which is like a new company, and actually, they first figure out the market and the product. It's called PMF, product market fit, and then if they have a match, then they build a company, right? So it's the opposite direction of a traditional company, that first you open a company and then you go find customers, right? And what happens is, in a few years ago, there was this movement of corporate innovation, all right? Like companies want to have like innovation labs. Labs companies were popular. There were these design thinking labs where people decouple thinking on discovery and execution, and then also this sort of innovation consultancy companies where they could either shadow your IT or help you to co-create in some side of a product, right? But then when you need to execute the idea, that's where the shit hits the fan, right? Because then you need to use your traditional IT, and then nothing works, right? And that's why that doesn't work. And the reason why that happens is because people and organizations have a hard time changing the org chart. They have a very hard time to change pieces and restructure and reorganize. And I think if what happens is like org chart is one big obstacle for flow and therefore for innovation, right? So there is this effect called empire building, that sometimes what people want to do is to have more people under them, so they can grow, they can have a big department. They're building their empire. That's why I have this building here, and they want to grow, right? They want to have people under them. They want to have an empire. They don't want to build the product. They don't want to innovate, and that's kind of everywhere. That's kind of the problems why the innovation doesn't happen, right? Because people want to control, they want to grow, they want to have people, they want to mandate stuff, they don't want to innovate, they don't want to change, they don't want to lose power, and that's why, long story short, we don't see much innovation from enterprise companies. We just see from startups, right? That's kind of the reality. And so this book about the team topologies, right, basically classifies a lot of other things that are obstacles for flow, or in other words, obstacles for innovation, right? Like pushing against Conway's law that says that your architecture pretty much will be a mirror of your communication structures. Software for big teams. I personally don't have many issues with big teams, big or small. I don't think that's kind of the issue, the size of the team. There is this Dunbar law that says, well, you cannot trust more than 15 people, right? But even so, there is confusing org design options. That happens a lot. Like a team is pulling in too many different directions. I see this a lot as well. Everybody on the team is doing something different for a different project. Painful reorg every few years, or every year there's a reorg, and it's very painful. Or flow is blocked through dependencies and other platforms or other teams. There is a disengaged teams, maybe because there's a pandemic, or because bad management or whatever, or too many surprise, right? Too many unknowns, or discovery is not done right, etc. So all these things kind of block the innovation, and you want to unblock, you want to fight all these things, so then you can make flow happens, right? So on the team topologies, teams are ways to model your communication and therefore model your architecture, right? And then on the book they talk about this four archetypes of a team, right? Like having a string aligned team, an enabling team, a complicated subsystem team, and a platform team. Oftentimes, I feel personally that when you use service-oriented architecture, platform teams can help, right? And I think they might be good for engineering organizations, but for product organizations, I feel like enabling or even string-aligned teams would work better, right? So I think like product and engineering, they have different natures, and I have a post about that. You can take a look on my blog. So now, still talking about organization, right? That's something that happens a lot. It's called pre-meetings, right? Often, in order to do a meeting, you need to do a pre-meeting, right? And lots of people, and there's books talking about this as well, believe that pre-meetings are waste of time, right? Because why do you need to have a meeting to talk? Why don't you talk on the meeting, right? And the reality that happens is because there's no trust, right? And then with a smaller audience, is easier to build trust. It's easy to show vulnerability and then figure out stuff. So, and then when you go to the meeting, you kind of prepare, or you know that you're gonna go to a specific direction, right? So one of the issues that meetings are painful are actually a side effect showing that you don't have trust there. And there's an awesome book about that. Is not on my list here, but one that I read on the past, and I think is really important for this case, is from Patrick, I forgot his last name, but it's about 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? And basically that's kind of the thing that happens. Often meetings are short, like 30 minutes, and then you have like a huge crowd there, and then you don't have time to go deep and discuss something. Stuff are kind of shallow, right? So like these prem meetings, all the way that we do meetings, you kind of need to change, right? One way to fix this is to really work things async, and 37 Signals really is great about that. There are at least 4 books I read from them that are really great on that, like he work, like it doesn't have to be crazy at work, and remote, and so many others, and they basically kind of push for that direction. And you don't need to buy the product to do that. You can buy if you want, but you simply can do that with a wiki or Google Docs, or any collaborative suite like Microsoft or Google, wherever, right? So it's really easy to start a document, have people collaborating there, or have a better understanding on what's going on. I personally like to record videos. Some people love it, other people hate, right? So but that's people. Some people love read, other people hate reading. So I feel like mixed formats work best, but you're never gonna be ideal for everybody, because people are different, and that's fine. So since we're talking about meetings, all right, the next subject is around feedback, and feedback is really, really hard, right? Basically, lots of people in companies that just give up, right? They don't give feedback. Because either it's a self-projection, or it's a misunderstanding, or people confuse perceptions and feelings with facts. Like I really, don't like people confusing emotions and feelings with facts, and that happens a lot. Sometimes people don't even bother to check the facts. They just have a preconception on their head, and they assume that's the truth, right? And that's also why it is hard. People don't do their due diligence. They don't do their homework, right? And then they have this broken idea about some people. Sometimes actually the whole problem is on the relationship, right? But they just blame the person, right? And that happens a lot, right? People often don't give feedback because sometimes or most of times it results in a catastrophe, right? I work in a very few number of companies that got this right, and even for the ones that got this right always have issues as well. So this is like an art. It's super hard. If you don't have this on the core, it's something really hard to build. You know, because in the end of the day, learning about ourselves can be painful. We have some things called trigger reactions where we need to understand our reactions. Something like Americans often call this like a hot button issue. You say some word and that word triggers a rage or a lot of emotions, and basically we need to learn to deal with that, right? We need to learn to identify these things. That's why some people do therapy, right? To learn about themselves better. But often what happens is the other way around, right? There's a fire, shoot down the fire alarm, right? And move on. And that's what happens pretty much, right? So sometimes 90%, I think it's much more than 90, right? For me, maybe this is a 95 or 99% of the time, right? Feedback is wrong. Don't get me wrong. It's wrong, right? It's said in the wrong way. It's said about it's not even aimed to help sometimes. It's just like a shallow. It doesn't have examples. It doesn't say what behavior needs to change. It's really wrong judgment. But there are 10% of the times, even if it's said completely wrong, by the wrong person, by the wrong time, by the wrong way, it can actually help you to grow, right? And the hard thing is that we need to decouple feedback from the relationship, and we never do that. We often, to get good feedback, we need to get good relationship, and that's really the hard part. Because if that person says something to me, I'm gonna drop it because it's that person, right? So that's kind of the issue, and we don't control other people, and the only person we control is ourselves. So that 10%, that thing could be enough to make us grow, right? So that's kind of the way. So but in the other side of the coin, all right, when we give feedback, it feels right, it feels great, right? When we receive feedbacks, well, it feels wrong. It's always like that, right? And basically, the better we understand ourselves, we will make it useful for us, right, to understand why we are being misunderstood, or to understand what we are doing that we are not realizing, right, and we could be wrong and we need to improve. So, but often what happens is these emotional triggers derail the whole feedback, right, and we disqualify the feedback based on how the feedback was given to us, when was given, and who gave us to us, right? And if anything the person says would trigger something on you, maybe again we need to revisit the relationship first. So emotions distort the feedback, and that's why it's hard. And also, feedbacks there are kinds of feedbacks. There's not just one kind of a feedback, right? So there is appreciation. I'm saying something because you did great. You kick it ass, you deliver something, you fix a hard bug, or you had a great proactive attitude or whatever. There is coaching. Well, if you do this, you can improve your performance. Or if you do that, there's an easy way to do what you're doing. Or there's evaluation, right? Well, I was expecting that you went better on that situation because of that, and you didn't went well because you was rushing too much to fix it, and I was expecting more system thinking from you and stuff like that, right? So there's this different buckets, right? And sometimes when you're asking feedback, you're asking for what? You're asking for coaching to get better. You're asking for evaluating, probably because you're asking for a raise or something like that. Or you're asking for appreciation. and we need to understand that different buckets, right? And sometimes, people just don't give feedback at all, and that's totally normal, right? So when we asking for feedback, we can say, okay, I'm asking for some coaching, all right? So how should I proceed on this situation, all right? Or I'm asking for evaluation. How do you think I went on that? Do you think I went well? Do you think I did the right things? Or you can say, hey, do you think that was a good work? Maybe if you're looking for appreciation. And sometimes the easy way to get feedback is asking for advice, right? That's how you end up getting good feedback. There is a great book that is called Thanks for the Feedback. It will be on the reference at the end. It was an amazing book. I read it recently. I was surprised to learn so many things. So it's one of the best, definitely the best book I ever read about feedback. I highly recommend to you guys. So it's still going on this idea of asking for feedback, right? So so feedback is hard. Sometimes emotions and relationships get into the way, but how can we make it better, right? How can we improve? And that's often, we got this awful advice, like the shit sandwich, right? Oh, tell something good for the person, then you wrap it with something bad, and then you have this third sandwich. Well, that sucks, right? So like some stuff you can do is like, you can laugh about it if you make it like with a good energy. Don't take yourself too much seriously. This will destroy the anxiety and will take much less energy, and then will be easier for everybody, right? Just don't make it a big deal, all right? So that's a good way to make the feedback flow a bit easier, right? So learning from feedback is also how it's highly related to our identity. Like we think, oh, I am a hardworking guy, right? When we think about ourselves, and that's something interesting, right? Let it sink in for a moment. We think about our with a binary mind. So you think, okay, so if I am a hardworking person, I am always hardworking, 100% of the times, forever, from now on until I died, right? Or if I am person who communicates well, I always communicate well. It's binary, right? It's atomics from now on to the future. And that's actually not true, right? You can be a person that communicates well and is hardworking, for instance, as an example, right? But that could be a day that you're not doing that well, or that could be a specific situation that you are not doing that well for other reasons, right? Or and that's the thing, right? If you decouple your identity from a specific situation, that make you more resilient, and the feedback will hurt you much less, right? So I found this a great advice, right? Basically, you widen your identity and you say, well, I am a hardworking person, but maybe on that situation I didn't work hard, right? And that's fine, I think that's a really great advice, right? So another thing is to have this abundance, this mindset that is anti-scarcity, right? That basically you have this psychological term that is the growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. So the story about the growth and fixed mindset is like this, right? There was a group, two groups, right? And they made this experiment where one group, they went to the group before a test and they said, hey guys, you suck, you are really bad, you're gonna go really bad on that test, don't even study, you guys suck, you won't make it, all right? And then the other group, they went there and said, hey guys, you rock, you're awesome, you need to, you're gonna kick ass, I'm sure you're gonna nail it, and guess what happens, right? The group that got like this positive energy, they end up going much better from comparing with the group which got this negative energy, right? So, and that was called growth and fixed mindset, right? Sometimes we have this fixed mindset, and actually we need to have this growth mindset, right? And that's how we keep expanding, like we keep having this student mindset where we are always humble and learning, right? So in that sense, right, you want to avoid the simple labels, like this binary mentality I'm calling, like we are all or nothing, right? Oh, I am smart or stupid, right? And that helps. And finally, the growth versus fixed mindset, right, is not who you are, but what you do, right? So maybe you are a great person, but on that situation you did wrong, and that's fine. That will not make you a bad person, right? So learning to see yourself in a more complex way, it really helps, right? To make you less emotional and use that to learn, even when there is injustice, even when if the person who is giving the feedback is immature or is wrong or is rude, right? That can be good for you. So now, another stuff that it never happens, right? Or I see it happen only with the more modern and the good ones, right? Not everybody, but like the good engineering managers, the good coaches, right? They have this ability to debug teams, right? And I feel like this is a term that is not being used a lot. I know one book about this team. It's not on the references here, but actually it's called debugging teams. But oftentimes, managers need to debug a team, and that doesn't happen. What happens is blame a team. Oh, that person is the problem. That team's the problem. So basically, let's fire them, right? And that's a very Newtonian thinking, the very linear and dumb way to think. Oh, if I fire that person, all problems are fixed, right? And that's not true. So basically, debugging means, okay, so this problem is more complex. I won't be able to draw a clear cut easily, right? So I literally need to debug. And I think this mindset, this mentality is really great, right? Imagine that you need to debug your team. As an engineering manager, as a coach, you need to debug your team, all right? So you need, and debugging sometimes means, right? It means what? It means, well, there's this problem, and the only way to move forward is cutting scope. And that's what you need to do. Nobody likes to cut scope, but that's what needs to happen. That's the only way to deliver, cutting scope, and find what scope can be cutted or simplified, right? That's a way to debug a team that's not performing. Another way is can we do more with less? Can we find a smart way to do that, right? And other times, compromises that need to happen. I need to compromise the schedule, or I need to compromise the technical solution. But if the answer is always compromise the technical solution, you are not debugging the team, right? You are just following with the tunneling effect and create a time bomb for the future, right? So always sacrificing technical solutions is not the answer. But it doesn't mean that sometimes they're the right thing to do, right? But leadership, and there's a book on that on the reference, right? A great book, a military book, is about balance. And that's the thing. You need to balance between when you kind of cut the schedule, negotiate with the business, or when you actually go on the technical solution. So other times, you could have some coaching issues, right? So are you missing guidance, or someone in your team is not giving guidance, or maybe you have an architect that's not guiding the team, and that could be what's going on. Other times could be there's a relationship issue, or it could be like some lack of some skill or personal issue going on, So as a coach or engineering manager, you need to learn how to debug the teams, not to blame and fire someone, right away. This is interesting idea and practice that came from the Manager Path, I think, a Camille book, where she talks about this idea of a pre-mortems, and I found this really cool. Basically, you simulate problems before them happen, and that's a way to prevent them to happen, right? So that's like scenario modeling. And then you can imagine these issues before happen. There's another book about leadership called The Dichotomy of Leadership, these ideas of balance that I was talking about. They also talk about similar idea that I'm going to comment in a moment. But going back to Camille book, this can be useful to detect problems before that happen, and some ideas, right? Like you could imagine, okay, would this software that we are building gonna scale? Would the dependencies be honored? Like I'm calling another service, right? And I have a dependency. There is a contract. That contract will be honored, or they will change the contract. That will, affect me. Would I be able to hold back if something goes wrong? Like Amazon says, the one or two way doors approach. Would it work without parameter X, Y, Z, or the dependency failure? What happens if dependency X is not done? How can we work around? Can we do some failure matrix? Can we do any kind of a fallback, right? So that's pre-mortems. Similar idea, but applied to train and to get coaches, agile coaches and engineering managers better is I feel like this is not used a lot, but like rolling playing, right? Like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, right? Basically where you use role playing to train leaders, and that military book I mentioned, the dichotomy for leadership. Also, I read another book from them, the Extreme Ownership. Good books, by the way, but they basically talk about this. You could get managers and leaders and train them with a sort of rolling planning, right? Because if you think about it, coders, right, programmers, developers, they do dojos, right? And what managers do? Actually nothing, right? I mean, how we train leaders, how we improve things, right? Often is only through experience, and experience means bad decisions and bad experience, right? But no, we can do role playing exercise, right? So easily we can see struggles in training before they happen in real life, right? So one easy way to start is to kind of have some hypothetical use cases and questions, and then you could ask the manager or the engineering manager or the coach about that scenarios, right? And then based on that you can see how the person goes and what could happen and so on and on. So this full role playing games can be effective and fun. So this is another one mindset or interesting idea to apply, right? We always have this idea that we can test everything, that everything can be covered, right? I personally don't believe much in test coverage. I don't believe in 100% test coverage, right? Because again, that's another Newtonian idea that you can prevent all bugs basically by testing everything, and that's not how it works, right? Complex systems are not easier to predict. You can imagine what will happen, but you cannot say exactly when will happen, right? So it doesn't work like that. And then what happened actually, it is that that's a very Silicon Valley idea where sometimes imagine you have a high competition rate, right? Let's say between Uber and Lyft, right? And then sometimes releasing a feature even with bugs is much better, and because you get ahead of the competition and then you fix the bug later on, right? And that's also something, some good food for thought, because we often think in the opposite direction, right? Like, oh, let's have a sonar cube, and if we don't achieve 100% as metric, no buyers deploys, right, etc. And actually, you could be preventing flow, you could be preventing innovation, could be blocking things, and still a bug could happen. Still a failure could happen, right? Because you cannot legislate failure, right? It doesn't work like that. Legislation only works with simple systems. There's no way to legislate complex systems, and that's why we are having a very hard time talking about AI, right? And I made a good video, or I think it's an interesting video about it, right? You guys can take a look on my blog as well, on the YouTube channel. But that's something to be considered, right? Sometimes you actually want to release first and fix the bug later, and that's totally fine, right? Now, talking about culture, right? Netflix has this book they released recently. I read two books already from Netflix culture. One was about Patty McShort, I think. Powerful is on the references here, but the last one I read was No Rules Rules. That was from the CEO and a girl called Erin. And I read another book from her called Culture Map. Pretty interesting as well. But basically, Netflix is really amazing because they go against the traditional wisdom, and this presentation is all about that, right? So basically, it's really awesome to see the CEO saying that the risk for Netflix is the lack of innovation, right? Lack of innovation is the risk. Lack of innovation could kill Netflix, and I see similar philosophy on Amazon, for instance. However, Netflix doesn't have like innovation Fridays. They just have amazing people and they let people do their thing, right? And that's it. So they have this philosophy of do not seek to please your boss, right? To do what's better for the company. Treat people as grow-ups, right? And expect people to have good, amazing judgment, right? And based on that, you don't need to have policies for everything, right? And their metaphor, and took a while for them to get there, was to have, something like high sport teams, not a family, right? Because, they believe that the company is not about job security. So they have this thing, and I need to admit, it's a bit terrifying, right? Keeper test, right? Where they say you could ask your manager, hey, if I quit right now, would you keep me? And if they say yes, good. If they say no, well, both you can think, right? But even there's people on the book, they talk about this. Lots of people have this thoughts about, would they fire me? Would I get fired? But then their keeper test is one way to deal with it. The other way they have to deal with that is the firing Q&A, where they explain why someone was fired, why something was bad. And basically, the whole philosophy is you deal with the specific issues individually rather than try to control everybody. And I think that's really interesting approach. And for them, it proved to be profitable, right? So that's something to consider. In sense of feedback, they also have some advice. They have this 4A guideline where you try to structure your feedback in this way. First of all, it's optional, right? But you aim to assist, so you have some candor, right? You are going there, you're saying that to the person because you want to help the person. It is not a punishment thing. It needs to be actionable, right? So when you are giving feedback, you're actually doing your homework. You are separating the facts from the emotions, right? So you say, okay, do this next time, right? And you also try to make it appreciative, right? In a way that, you keep the relationship healthy. And, either you accept or discard. So that's kind of their guideline. There is this, still on this idea of relationships, there's this very old book called The Seven Effective... the 7 mindsets or the 7 habits of effective people, something like that. I need to confess, I hate this title. I think this title was like a clickbait or anything. It took me a long time to read this book, more than 10 years probably, because the title sounds very fishy. But I need to admit, besides being a bit long, actually it's a good book. And one thing is cool is this idea the book talks about of a emotional bank account, where your relationship with someone is like a battery, right? It's not like a binary thing like we think, either like or don't, right? It's like flipping. And then based on the emotion account, based on the battery, right? Or based on the money on the emotional account, you decide, when to kind of compromise or give a harder feedback, or you know what I mean. You not always act as one way, so you judge the the amount of money on the bank account, and that will guide you to push more or push less. And I think that's a really great way, really interesting way to operate. And on the book, they also talk about this win-win or no deal, and that's a very interesting idea. Sometimes I feel this a bit hard to implement on corporations because often, people do political games, and it's hard. But the idea it is that you know what I want is not more important than our relationship. So the relationship is in kind of in a first place, and then you try not to have a short term win that could be a long term lose, right? So the long term is not a win win for both. Either way will be win lose or lose lose. In the end of the day will be lose lose, right? Because if you harass the relationship, it will not work at all, right? So that's interesting to have this long term thinking, all right? And one of the feedback from the book the author talks about is to focus on interest, not in positions, right? Focus on where we want to get, not where we are right now, or often if you be more abstract and kind of don't go in much specific details, it's easier to find a common ground or a common sense than being specific in every detail, right? If every detail needs to be there, it may be hard to find compromises, right? There's another book I read, I think last year or 2 years ago, something like that. There's a book about FBI and SWAT teams and negotiators in cases of crisis. It will be on the references called Never Split the Difference, I think. And they talk about, having like 5 people just to listen, all right? And that's interesting advice, And in here on the 7 habits or mindset of effective people, they talk about listen twice as much as you speak, right? And in this other book they have like 5 people just to listen, right? So really paying more attention on listen is a good way to go. And on this book they talk about a technique from another book from Roger Williams called principal negotiation, where they say that you basically looking for options for having mutual gain, and you basically go over this framework. You see the problem from another point of view, so you try to wear the other person's shoes. You identify the key issues and concerns, not the positions, right? Not specific details, and then you determine what results would be acceptable, right? And then you try to identify more options, right? So it's an interesting framework that can help you to have better relationships and often negotiate with people and get on the right place. And believe me, everything is a negotiation, right? That doesn't matter if you are a manager or not. Even as a IC, an individual contributor, you need to negotiate. You need to deal with other people. You need to deal with teams. So you need to negotiate. That's important acknowledgement. Now, something that I have a lot of interest is this idea of deep work. There is a book I read about it called Deep Work, where they talk about this idea of the tower, where basically they want to fight shallowness, right? So they talk about the writer Carl Jung, that he had sort of a retreat in 1922, almost 100 years ago. And then on this retreat, which was sort of a tower, he had like 2 hours of non-interrupted writing, and he even didn't have electricity there. And sometimes he was doing like long walks. And long walks is interesting because I know that like Steve Jobs was really into doing long walks to talk with someone. So deep work is really necessary for improvement. there is some sort of categories of problems. Often, with technology, some problems are really tough, and we really cannot learn, or we really cannot improve or deliver complex work with interruption. Right? Interruption is really the bad guy, and we have this depth destroy behavior where we immediately answer emails or immediately answer social media response, and that kind of kills the deep work, and we need to protect our deep work, right? 37 Signals talk about, I don't remember if it was in Getting Real, or it doesn't have to be Crazy at Work or He Work, but one of their books, or all of them, they talk about this. I think it was in It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work, of the calendar Tetris, where one of the worst inventions ever was a calendar where everybody could book a meeting for you, and then you just have like bits of work during work. So, and if you want to get work done, you go home. All right. And I saw that, and I lived that so many times in my past jobs. Basically, going back to deep work book, what you need to do is to have free time, right, and uninstructed, right. Structure sometimes is bad, and it require more work to be enjoyed. So, if you want to dive deeper, you need to keep stop answering mails faster, like exhausting your peers, and that's an interesting idea. And if you look like Amazon has similar deep dive principles, right? And I always 37 Signals also talks about this, about the async nature of work, right? Just because you got a message from a chat, it doesn't mean you need to answer right now, right? You can answer when you can, or later on, and that's really a good way. One practice I did with people in the past, and at least for me, I thought it worked very well, was to have like in Slack, for instance, different channels with different priorities. Then, if there was a message on one specific channel, everybody should drop everything and answer, right? Otherwise, if it's in other channels, it could take days to answer, and that will be fine. So I think like modeling priority could be an awesome way to do this. One cool thing about this book, they talk about this idea of internet Sabbath, right? That you need to get out of the internet and have long times off the internet. That's a very interesting idea, right? Disconnect from the world. And then the author says that you need to schedule your internet usage at home and work, and even after work. And that's really a cool principle. I found a plugin for Chrome where I can say how many hours I want to spend per site per day, and then after that he doesn't let me open the site, and it's a really good way to hack behavior and get on that mindset. So how long do you do deep work? Well, deep work is really exhausting, right? If you try to code a hard problem or debug a complex issue for 8 hours, is very exhaustive, right? So the author says that, well, in the beginning, try to do 1 hour per day, but more than 4 hours will be hard, right? And that can work well with lunch breaks and stuff like that. You want to schedule every minute of your day, and I do that. And I have a old post where I talk about this as well, where you want to take control of your calendar, otherwise people will control for you, and they will take over, right? So you basically want to take control of your schedule. You want to schedule everything, so then in that way you can work. Otherwise you're just gonna be doing meetings and shallow work, and you will not be able to get real work done. And real work means deep work, right? Most of times. Offices, and that's mentioned on deep work and also on 37 Signals book. There are interruption factors, right? And I personally, I hate open offices, right? I prefer much more cubicles, right? Yes, that 80 things, because then you have much more, space and privacy, and you can get things done. Um, like I said multiple times, favor async is a 37 signals idea. And one thing for managers, for engineering managers, for anyone in a leadership position, right? And even for ICs, right? We need to start learning the difference between urgency and anxiety. Lots of time, especially in COVID times right now, we're just anxious, right? It's not just, that's not urgent. Nobody gonna die, or that can wait until tomorrow, right? And we need to start learning the difference between the two things. When something is just anxiety, we just being anxious, or is real urgent. So that's what I have for today, guys. I want to share some of the books I mentioned. Thanks for the feedback. It's like one of really the best book I read about feedback recently. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The name is fishy, but has good insights about negotiations and relationships. Is really good book about it. In my opinion, much better than common books nowadays, like a non-violent communication. I found that one much better. Not that I don't like non-violent communication, but I think that's more like a training thing, or reading. I don't think you learn much just from reading it, but on this book I get much more advices. I read both, all right, but that's why I'm recommending this one over the non-violent communication one. The No Rules from Netflix, where you're gonna see a lot about their culture, and how they choose to treat people as grow-ups. Principle by Hey Dalio also was some of the ideas around here. He has lots of interesting insights. Also about feedback, he has some very good insights about feedback. Deep Work, like I was talking earlier. Ego is the Enemy. Creativity Inc. That's the book from the guys from Pixar. It also has an interesting management advice. Team Topologist, which talks about the issues with org shots and why there's a blocker for innovation, how you can structure different kinds of teams. Dichotomy of Leadership, which is the same guys who wrote Extreme Ownership, where they talk about balance and also some relationships. The Manager's Path, that's a good book if you are a beginner, let's say a beginner engineer manager or a beginner coach. But I personally think if you are more like a senior, it won't be much news for you, but it's not a bad book. But one thing that I learned from this book was this idea of the pre-mortems, so kudos to that. Upstream, which is an amazing book. On the beginning, when I talk about complexity, tunneling, the gaming, they all talk about that. Extreme Programming, really great book about Agile, right? Really recommend it. Peopleware as well, where they talk about like different realities for different teams, like operations and engineering teams. Some of these ideas was there as well. Powerful, which is the former VP of HR from Netflix, Patty McChord, also very cool book. Never Split the Difference. This is the book that from SWAT and FBI teams that I said that sometimes they have like 5 people listening to stuff. It's also a great book about negotiation and relationships. Getting Real Work. It doesn't have to have crazy at work and remote. Are all 37 Signal books. They're really great about culture and async work. And the Everything Store has stuff about Amazon, and also some of the things I mentioned here. And that's what I have. Sorry for the long video. I hope you guys like it. See you next time. Take care. Cheers.